4:37 a.m. No announcement, no warning, no press vans idling at the curb. Just a thin line of unmarked federal SUVs rolling to a stop in front of a 3-story municipal building that most residents of the city passed every day without noticing. The temperature sat well below freezing. Exhaust hung low and white in the dark. Doors opened in silence. 46 federal agents stepped out almost simultaneously. FBI, ICE. 2 task force medics. Weapons low, muzzles disciplined, faces covered. This was not a warrant meant to be seen. This was containment. Their target occupied the top floor. On paper, Abdirahman Issa Noor, 54, was a regional political figure, a negotiator, a fixer, a man who spoke softly at council meetings and posed for photos beside flags and smiling donors. His office handled community development, municipal coordination, and interagency outreach. To the public, he was a stabilizing presence. To federal analysts, he was something else entirely. A convergence point. The breach came fast. A hydraulic ram struck the reinforced door once, twice. On the third impact, the frame failed inward with a sharp metallic crack that echoed down the stairwell. Agents flowed through the opening without hesitation. The lights came on, the room filled with motion. Inside, the office looked exactly as it should have. Diplomas on the wall, family photographs, framed certificates. Neatly stacked binders labeled with zoning codes and budget cycles. An American flag stood in the corner, its fabric barely stirring from the rush of air. But the sweep did not stop at the surface. Behind a floor-to-ceiling cabinet, agents located a false panel secured with industrial fasteners. It came away under pressure, revealing a recessed storage cavity that had never appeared on any building plan. Inside were vacuum-sealed packages stacked with logistical precision, brick after brick, wrapped, labeled, weighed. 300 kilograms of narcotics, not street product, not loose inventory. This was shipment-grade material, prepared for transfer, stamped with codes matching known Somali organized crime distribution routes operating across multiple states. Enough volume to flood entire regions if released downstream. Enough to trigger a national response on its own. The room went quiet. Then another team called out from the adjacent storage area. What had been registered as an archive room held palletized crates stacked to the ceiling. On their surfaces, faded shipping labels marked them as surplus equipment destined for disposal. Inside the crates were weapons, not a few, not dozens. Nearly 1 metric ton. Disassembled rifles, machine gun components, ammunition sealed against moisture, parts cataloged and packed for rapid reassembly. The quantity alone exceeded what most small militias could field. The organization suggested intent, not accumulation. While weapons teams secured the find, digital specialists moved to the main desk. Multiple phones lay unlocked, screens still lit. Encrypted messaging apps pulsed with unread notifications. Timelines, coordinates, delivery windows. Nothing dramatic, no threats, just logistics. Then came the documents. A steel safe embedded into the wall behind a framed certificate required a drilling team. When it opened, agents did not find cash. They found paper, folders bound with clips, USB drives labeled in block letters, internal memoranda stamped restricted, transit diagrams, access lists, schedules annotated by hand. These were not criminal notes. These were institutional documents, materials originating from municipal offices, regional agencies, and oversight bodies that were never meant to leave secure environments. Some referenced inspection protocols. Others outlined emergency exceptions. A few carried signatures from officials who had no public association with Noor at all. This was the moment the operation shifted. What had been scoped as a corruption and trafficking case crossed a threshold. The presence of classified and sensitive administrative material changed the calculus. This was no longer just about drugs and weapons. This was about access, about who knew what, and who had been allowed to look away. By 4:58 a.m., Noor was in custody. No resistance, no statement. His hands rested calmly on the desk as agents read the charges. The office that had functioned for years as a public interface now stood stripped to its frame, every drawer emptied, every surface photographed. Outside, the city remained asleep. Inside federal command channels, alerts began to cascade. Analysts matched serial numbers, cross-referenced file headers, linked shipment codes to active investigations that had stalled months earlier without explanation. Patterns emerged too clean to ignore. This was not a hidden stash. This was a node. And as the last evidence crate was sealed and tagged, a single directive moved outward from command. Expand immediately. Lock the perimeter. Activate all secondary targets. Because whatever had been operating out of this office was already bigger than one man. By 5:11 a.m., the scene at the municipal building had gone static. Evidence teams worked in silence. Phones were bagged, drives cloned, documents photographed before being sealed. Outside, traffic lights cycled over empty intersections. To anyone watching the city wake up, nothing appeared different. Inside federal systems, everything was changing. The first confirmations came from document analysis units. The papers recovered from the safe were not copies. They were originals, wet signatures, sequential page numbers, internal routing marks. Materials that should have lived inside secure filing rooms had been removed intact, without triggering alerts. That fact alone suggested cooperation rather than theft. What followed was not a rush, it was accounting. Investigators began lining up dates, approvals, exemptions, temporary authorizations that had appeared routine at the time. Over the last 7 years, Noor's office had issued hundreds of administrative adjustments, small changes buried in meeting minutes and attachment files, each one defensible on its own. Together, they formed a pattern. 19 approvals modified inspection requirements at logistics facilities operating under humanitarian or municipal cover. 12 altered storage duration limits. 8 reclassified transit cargo as time-sensitive, reducing secondary review. None referenced narcotics, none referenced weapons. All were clean. When overlaid against shipment data pulled from seized phones, the alignment was exact. Windows opened, containers moved, windows closed. One document stood out. A 2-page memorandum authorizing emergency access credentials for contractors assisting with community infrastructure upgrades. The credentials bypassed physical checkpoints at 3 facilities. Within 48 hours of issuance, encrypted messages referenced clear corridors and green paths. No slang, no bravado, just confirmation. The sophistication unsettled senior agents. This was not a street network adapting upward. This was an administrative framework repurposed from the inside. The Somali organized crime groups tied to the case did not need to fight for territory. They had learned to file paperwork. At 6:02 a.m., a secondary team moved on a warehouse listed as municipal overflow storage on the city's south side. The building had passed inspections repeatedly. Its power consumption, however, exceeded normal thresholds by a factor of 4. Agents entered without resistance. Inside, shelving units held sealed containers labeled as medical supplies. Random samples confirmed narcotics consistent with the 300 kilograms recovered earlier. The packaging codes matched entries found on Noor's phones. The inventory was partial. The majority had already moved. Minutes later, a call came in from a traffic unit stationed near a freight corridor. A box truck had attempted an unscheduled departure from a facility flagged overnight. When officers initiated a stop, the driver abandoned the vehicle and fled on foot. He was apprehended within 2 blocks. The truck contained weapons components packed identically to those recovered from the office. The network was reacting. At 6:27 a.m., digital forensics teams detected simultaneous logins across multiple encrypted servers linked to accounts found on seized devices. Files began deleting in batches, not chaotically, selectively, as if following a checklist. Command issued a containment order. By 6:41 a.m., federal directives had expanded the operation beyond the city. ICE units were activated to locate individuals tied to Noor through shell organizations registered across state lines. Financial crime teams moved to freeze accounts that, until hours earlier, had never appeared connected. Transfers halted mid-cycle, balances locked. Compliance alerts triggered faster than human review could keep up. By 7:10 a.m., preliminary tallies showed more than $38 million immobilized. The money had flowed through nonprofits, consulting firms, and logistics contractors. None had employees. All had invoices. Every invoice matched an approval memo. What disturbed analysts most was what they did not see. No panic calls, no desperate messages, no attempts to bargain. Communications that continued after the arrest spoke in calm acknowledgments. Received, understood, proceed to secondary. This was a system designed to absorb loss. At 7:33 a.m., a final discovery sharpened the picture. One of the documents recovered from the safe referenced an internal designation used only within federal inspection databases, not a public code, not a contractor reference, something an outsider should never have known. The implication settled heavily. Access had not been stolen, it had been shared. As the morning advanced and the city fully woke, agents across multiple jurisdictions prepared to move again. The first arrest had exposed the surface. The second wave would test the depth because the network had not been built to hide forever. It had been built to look legitimate. At 8:04 a.m., the directive changed tone. What had begun as a contained federal action shifted into coordinated disruption. The order moved through secured channels without commentary or justification. It did not need either. The threshold had already been crossed. Execute all outstanding targets. No delay. Across the state, vehicles rolled out of garages with their lights off. Helicopters lifted into pale winter sky, rotors muffled by altitude and distance. Tactical teams converged on locations that had never appeared connected on paper. Municipal depots, leasing offices, temporary storage sites approved under emergency provisions that had never expired. The first simultaneous breach occurred at a freight consolidation center near a river port. On record, it handled surplus equipment transfers. In practice, it functioned as a sorting node. Agents entered through 2 access points and encountered resistance immediately. Not organized, not defensive. 2 men attempted to block a narrow corridor with automatic fire, firing blind around a corner they believed would hold. It did not. Flashbangs ended the exchange. Both suspects were taken alive. No federal injuries were reported. Inside the facility, agents found what they expected and more. Crates labeled as mechanical parts, concealed weapons components sealed in oil and vacuum wrap. Serial numbers filed down. Manufacturing marks intact. At a second site, a logistics office operating out of a nondescript commercial park, agents arrived to find shredders still warm. Hard drives lay in bins filled with solvent. Someone had been instructed to erase, not flee. That distinction mattered. Digital teams recovered fragments anyway. Backup nodes. Cache directories, time-stamped access logs showing who had touched which files and when. The deletions had begun less than 30 minutes after Noor was placed in custody. The system had been watching. By 9:12 a.m., ICE units reported the detention of 3 individuals tied to shell organizations flagged earlier that morning. Each claimed administrative roles. None could describe the services their companies provided. All had received regular payments routed through the same financial corridors. Financial containment accelerated. Accounts were frozen across multiple institutions. Transfers halted mid-execution. Automated fraud systems flagged transactions that had previously passed without question. The volume overwhelmed compliance desks. Analysts watched balances lock in real time as the network's liquidity evaporated. At 9:47 a.m., the first overt counteraction occurred. A marked evidence transport vehicle exiting a secondary site was forced to slow when debris appeared on the roadway ahead. As the driver maneuvered, a second vehicle attempted to block the rear. The move was clumsy, poorly timed, not a professional ambush, but an interruption. Agents reacted instantly. The blocking vehicle reversed hard and fled. No shots were fired, no pursuit followed. The message was not tactical, it was psychological. Within minutes, intelligence units intercepted communications referencing exposure risk and document compromise. The language avoided names, it avoided locations, it referenced processes. The concern was not arrests, it was what had been seized, the documents. At 10:21 a.m., a breakthrough reframed the entire operation. Forensic analysts confirmed that several of the seized memoranda originated from internal audit channels used to pre-clear inspection exemptions. These channels were not accessible through public systems. They required credentials tied to federal or state oversight roles. Someone inside the apparatus had provided access. The network had not hacked its way forward. It had been invited. As agents continued to secure locations, resistance shifted form. Not gunfire, not barricades, phone calls, legal motions, emergency injunctions filed within hours of the first arrest, citing jurisdictional overreach and procedural violations. The filings were polished, pre-drafted, waiting. Federal counsel anticipated them. Warrants expanded, seizure authority broadened, judges signed without delay. By midday, more than 20 locations had been entered. Weapons seizures exceeded initial estimates. Narcotics recovered from secondary caches added to the original count. Servers were pulled while still processing transactions. Evidence was cataloged faster than it could be contested. Veteran agents described the unfolding action not as chaos, but as exposure. A structure built on routine and speed was failing under scrutiny. And as noon approached, one conclusion hardened across every briefing room involved. This operation had not been designed to move drugs or weapons alone. It had been designed to move permissions. And permissions, once granted, were far more dangerous. By late afternoon, the movement had slowed, but the pressure had not eased. The last search teams returned with sealed crates and mirrored drives. Evidence rooms filled methodically. Every item was logged. Nothing was celebrated. The operation had not concluded. It had stabilized. That night, analysts began the second phase. They did not start with the narcotics or the weapons. Those were finite. They started with the documents, the permissions, the approvals that had quietly rewritten how oversight functioned. Page by page, they reconstructed a system that had never required secrecy to survive. It had relied on process. The seized files mapped a chain of access that extended well beyond Noor's office. Inspection windows had been shortened under emergency authority. Secondary reviews had been waived due to staffing reallocations. Facilities had been reclassified to avoid routine audits. Each change appeared minor. Together, they had opened corridors that no patrol unit could see. The results were no longer theoretical. Public health data arrived first. In counties aligned with the identified transit routes, overdose admissions had risen sharply over the previous winter quarter. Emergency departments reported shortages. Response times lengthened. Ambulances queued at entrances before sunrise. Analysts overlaid dates. The correlation was exact. Spikes followed approvals. Declines followed seizures. What had been optimized on spreadsheets had arrived as crisis. Weapons intelligence followed. Components recovered from secondary caches matched firearms used in several unsolved incidents across state lines. Ballistics linked them through shared machining marks. The ton of weapons was not surplus. It had been inventory. The silence that followed unsettled field teams more than resistance ever had. Media coverage appeared briefly, then thinned. Reports reduced to procedural updates, names omitted, context delayed. Editors cited verification standards. Producers waited for confirmations that did not arrive. Internal reviews later showed a pattern of contracted briefings and advisory relationships that encouraged restraint without instruction. No blackout had been ordered. Discretion had been exercised repeatedly in the same direction. Inside a secured facility, Noor sat alone across from a metal table. No cameras, no counsel. Investigators laid out the inventory without commentary. 300 kilograms of narcotics, 1 metric ton of weapons, digital records, access logs, original documents that had never been meant to leave locked rooms. He did not contest the counts. The case expanded regardless. Subpoenas widened. Oversight bodies initiated reviews. Committees scheduled emergency sessions. Each response addressed procedure, not cause. The question remained unspoken in public forums, but explicit in internal briefings. How had this been allowed to operate for so long? The answer was neither exotic nor hidden. It was ordinary. Every participant had performed a narrow function. Speed had been rewarded. Exceptions normalized. Verification deferred. The system had not failed under attack. It had failed under cooperation. When the final warrants were executed, there was no sense of victory, only inventory, only accounting. Careers ended quietly, programs were suspended, directives were rewritten. What collapsed was not a single network, it was an assumption. That legitimacy is guaranteed by titles, that order prevents misuse, that oversight is automatic. This case left a different conclusion behind. Systems do not protect themselves. They protect what they are instructed to move. And when permissions are misused, the damage arrives wearing paperwork. If you believe public office should never shield criminal networks, stay engaged. Oversight only works when people refuse to look away.